We are just a couple days out from UFC Fight Night, Barboza versus Lee. We've got a stacked 6-fight main card, and it's free, so make sure y'all don't miss this one. There's a lot of young prospects on this card who are looking to make a name for themselves in their divisions, and overall, there's just going to be some great matchups, so without any further ado, let's get right into these predictions. For the first fight on the main card, we have Jim Miller versus Dan the Hangman Hooker. Dan is on a really impressive 2-fight win streak. He first knocked out Ross Pearson, and he most recently submitted Mark DeCasey, while Jim Miller, the veteran, is on a 3-fight losing streak, and in my personal opinion, he's been out of his prime for a long time now. So I think this is Dan's fight to win, and this is definitely the fight where he's going to make a name for himself in the lightweight division. In terms of their physical attributes, for two guys in the same division, Dan is a lot bigger and he's got a much longer reach. So I think on the feet, Dan will be able to stay on the outside and pepper Jim with shots, just like he did in the Mark DeCasey fight. I could see Dan getting the knockout, but I don't think it's very likely. I think it's more likely for Dan to win a gritty decision. Usually, I would say if someone went to the ground against Jim Miller, that would be a bad thing, but Dan Hooker is also very well versed in his grappling and submission game, so I would give Dan the edge on the feet and on the ground. So in my opinion, Dan is going to outstrike Jim on the feet and outposition him on the ground. I don't really see a finish being that likely, so I'm going to say Dan Hooker wins by decision. For the next fight, we have number 8 ranked bantamweight Aljamain Sterling versus number 14 ranked Brett Johns. In my opinion, this fight has decision written all over it. Obviously, there could be a finish because anything can happen in MMA, but with this one, I see a really close decision, maybe a split decision here. Brett Johns is undefeated and he has a lot of hype behind him. Obviously, since they're giving him Aljamain, they're expecting him to do big things in the division. I do kind of think jumping from being ranked number 14 to fighting Aljamain Sterling is a little bit far of a jump. But on that same note, I think if there was ever a time to beat Aljamain, it would be right now because Aljamain just got brutally knocked out by a knee by Marlon Moraes. So most likely his confidence in the striking exchanges would have taken a hit. But I don't really think this fight is going to stay on the feet that much. Brett Johns is a really good wrestler. He's never been taken down in the UFC, and I think his game plan will be to take Aljamain down and grind him out to a decision. So I don't really think anybody's getting knocked out here unless that knee from Marlon just completely obliterated Aljamain's chin, and we just haven't seen that yet. So I see this going to a decision, and I think the winner is going to be the guy that outpositions the other guy on the ground the most, and I think Brett Johns is better at wrestling and grappling, so I see Brett Johns winning this decision here. Next up, we have David Branch versus Thiago Santos. Again, I think this is a fight where they gave the up-and-coming guy a little bit too tall of a task because David Branch looked amazing against Luke Rockhold for about the first round, and then obviously he got caught in that position, couldn't get out and tap to strikes. But I think David Branch showed a lot of good things in his return to the UFC against Krzysztof Jotko, and obviously in the first round of the fight against Luke. Thiago is a really good striker. He's on like a 4-fight knockout streak. And if this was a kickboxing match, I probably would give the edge to Thiago Santos, but since this is MMA, I think David Branch is going to be smart enough to realize that if he takes Thiago down, he's going to have a huge advantage. David Branch is a really good jiu-jitsu practitioner, and I do believe that he could submit Thiago on the ground. The only thing I'm worried about is the initial storm of like the first round or so when Thiago's going to be at full energy and be looking to take David Branch's head off, but David Branch has never been knocked out. He's been knocked out by a slam, and he's submitted to strikes before, but he's never got caught on the chin and got knocked out. So I do think David Branch's chin's going to hold up for the first round, even if he gets tagged a couple times, and I think he's going to be smart enough to realize that if he takes Thiago down, he will have a huge chance of winning. So with this matchup, I think that David Branch is going to use his jiu-jitsu skills to expose Thiago's lack of jiu-jitsu skills on the ground, and David Branch is going to end up getting the submission probably around the second or third round. For the next fight, we have heavyweight prospect Justin Willis versus Chase the Vanilla Gorilla Sherman. My analysis for this fight is going to be very brief and straight to the point. Chase Sherman is most recently coming off of a knockout loss to Shamil Abdurakhimov, and unfortunately I have to say that Chase is a little bit chinny even for a heavyweight. And on the flip side of that, based on Justin Willis's last performance, he hits like a truck and he has true knockout power. 2 plus 2 equals 4. I see Justin Willis getting an early knockout, and I think after he knocks out Chase Sherman, they're going to start giving him some higher ranked heavyweights, and we'll probably see him propel up the rankings. I'm not saying there's not huge holes in his game, but in his matchup with Chase Sherman, I do think it would stay on the feet probably the entire time for the short time they're on the feet, because I see Justin Willis getting an early knockout. So my final prediction is Justin Willis by first round knockout. For the co-main event, we have the very quick and questionable return of Frankie Edgar versus Cub Swanson, who almost left the UFC. His contract ran out, and he was in talks with another organization. I think it was probably PFL, and we almost lost Cub, but now they're back for a rematch. This fight has already happened, and I'd say that Frankie had a pretty dominant performance the first time. He ended up getting the submission on Cub, but with this one, there's some different circumstances. Frankie just recently, very recently, like 2 months ago, got brutally knocked out by Brian Ortega, and he's even admitted that he hasn't sparred without headgear, and he hasn't been taking any headshots in sparring either. So that calls into question why he would return so early to fight somebody like Cub that has knockout power. But despite the fact that Frankie most recently got KO'd, and he's probably still suffering from the effects of that, I do think he's going to be able to replicate his last performance against Cub. Cub kind of doesn't really have a good ground game, or good enough to stop Frankie, obviously, because we've literally seen this fight before. So despite the fact that Frankie most recently got stopped with a brutal knockout, I do think that he's going to be able to out-wrestle Cub and eventually get a decision. Maybe after that, Cub might leave the UFC and go to the PFL, which if he did that, I'd be happy for him, because I think he would have a good chance of winning their featherweight tournament and getting $1 million, which is probably a lot more than he's getting in the UFC. But back in terms of this matchup, I just basically see Frankie out-wrestling Cub, out-positioning him, peppering him with shots, from some ground and pound, and getting a decision victory. I think Frankie still has title shot aspirations. I don't know how likely it is that he could ever get the belt again, but in terms of this matchup with Cub Swanson, I see Frankie Edgar getting the decision victory. And finally, for the main event, we have a key lightweight matchup. We have Edson Jr. Barboza versus Kevin the Motown Phenom Lee. Edson is most recently coming off of a decision loss to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Although it was a decision, he got mauled, he got massacred, taken down a whole bunch of times, controlled on the ground. And in a way, I think that was kind of a blueprint for Kevin to beat him, because Kevin kind of has a similar style to Khabib. He'll take you down, get a dominant position, and then ground and pound you into a victory or submit you. Obviously, on the feet, I'd say Edson has a huge advantage, and I do think he has a fairly big chance to knock out Kevin Lee. Kevin's been knocked out before by guys that weren't even known for their striking, let alone probably the best striker in the lightweight division in Edson Barboza. But Edson has shown in the past that he doesn't really perform well when someone puts a lot of pressure on him and he has to be on the back foot. And I think that's the way Kevin Lee fights, and I think he's going to fight that way even more so this time, because he saw the success that Khabib had with that same style. So I think we could really see like a very similar, almost a replica of the Khabib fight in this. I think Kevin's going to be pressuring forward and shooting for takedowns, trying to get the clean low singles. And once he gets Edson down, Khabib was trying to make a point by prolonging the fight into a decision, but I think Kevin's going to try to one-up Khabib by getting the finish. So I think obviously, unless Kevin gets starched on the feet, he's going to be able to pressure Edson, take him down, and he's going to try to secure up an early submission like a rear naked choke. So my prediction here is Kevin Lee by first or second round rear naked choke.